about the future of the Qantas Group. And they really are focused on exactly that, making sure the national carrier has a strong future. Aviation is used to sudden shocks. Qantas has dealt with several just in the last decade and come through even stronger. But we've never experienced anything like this before. No one has. Right now, all airlines are in the middle of the biggest crisis our industry has ever faced. Efforts to contain COVID-19, which we all agree are so important, have devastated travel demand almost overnight. Airline revenues have collapsed. Entire fleets are grounded. And the world's biggest carriers are taking extreme action just to survive. The Qantas Group entered this crisis in better shape than most. We used record profits to strengthen our balance sheet over the last few years. We built the leading full-service and low-fares airline in our home market. And we carved out a separate earnings stream with Qantas Loyalty. And this gives us some of the brightest prospects for recovery in the aviation industry. But this crisis has still hit us very hard. And the impact will be felt for a long time. Particularly, I'm sorry to say, the impact on our people. There are clearly some green shoots domestically. We're planning to be back to 40% of our pre-crisis domestic flying during July, and hopefully more in the months that follow. But we all know that we will be living with COVID-19 for some time. And recent events show we can't take a low infection rate for granted. It is very clear that international travel is likely to be stalled for some considerable time. IATA, the peak body for the airline industry, says it will take more than 3 years for global travel to return to 2019 levels. That means all airlines, including Qantas, must take action now. We have to position ourselves for several years where revenue will be much lower, and that means becoming a smaller airline in the short term. Today, we're announcing a 3-year plan to guide our recovery and take us through to the better days ahead. It's a plan that I have agreed to stay on as Group CEO to see through. The plan has 3 immediate actions to safeguard the national carrier's future and the majority of the jobs that it supports. The first is to right-size our workforce, our fleet, our capital spending for a world that has less flying for an extended period. The second is to restructure to deliver ongoing savings across the group operations in a changed market. And the third is recapitalising through an equity raise that will strengthen our balance sheet and accelerate our recovery. The actions that we're taking will have a huge impact on thousands of our people. This is something that weighs very heavily on all of us. This is something that we don't make a decision on very easily. But the collapse of billions of dollars in revenue leaves us with little choice if we are to save as many jobs as possible longer term. Many of the 6,000 job losses we've announced today are people who have spent decades here. They're people we know personally. They are people that we know for a long time. And it is not unusual to have several members of one family working at Qantas and at Jetstar. What makes this even harder is right before this crisis hit, we were actively recruiting. We were gearing up for Project Sunrise. We were getting ready to take delivery of new aircraft, 787s and A320neos. Now we're facing a sudden reversal of fortune that is no one's fault, but it's very hard to accept. Across the world, airlines are shrinking by up to 50%. To avoid anything of this scale, we will be extending the stand down for a large number of our people as we wait for the recovery we know will be coming. Separate to the 6,000 job losses, about 15,000 people will remain stood down for some time. People from whom we have no work, but we will have work for them in the future. Around half of those stood down will be back flying domestically, we think, by the end of this calendar year. The remainder, mostly those supporting international flying, will return to work more slowly. Thousands of Qantas and Jetstar people have already found secondary employment during their stand-down periods. And I'm literally getting feedback from their employers every other day about how positive they have and the contribution they've added to those businesses. We know our people are incredibly sought after. We know our people do an incredible job. And for many of our people on stand down, JobKeeper has made all the difference. We have had good discussions with the government about possibly extending JobKeeper or some other form of support for those in the aviation industry who will be stood down for an extended period. And I had a conversation with the Prime Minister and the Treasurer last night about that exact issue. We're also in dialogue with state and territory governments about their borders openings, because once that happens, we can get more of our people back to work. We will do the best we can to manage the impact on those leaving the organisation and those continuing to stand down. We'll first of all be offering voluntary redundancy rather than compulsory redundancies as much as possible. We'll give support for career transitions, and for those stood downs, we'll give ongoing access to long service and annual leave, as well as all of our welfare programs. We will consult with the relevant unions over the coming days and weeks. And I think these unions are well aware of the challenges facing the industry, and I hope that they're ready to work with us to make the implementation of this as best and as efficient and focused on our people as possible. As I mentioned, the Qantas Group has extremely bright prospects for recovery. And the faster we recover, the sooner most of our people can get back to work. To help with this, we've announced an equity raising for the first time in a decade, which follows a long period of returning significant capital to our shareholders. The proceeds from this raising, up to $1.9 billion, will strengthen our balance sheet and accelerate our recovery. And once we have recovered, this capital will help us take advantage of opportunities that emerge. There is a lot of details on the equity raising in the press releases that we have issued today, so please refer to them for the details of how that's going to work. This year was supposed to be one of a celebration for Qantas. It is our centenary. We're the oldest continuous operating airline on the globe. And clearly, this is not turning out as planned. Though we do draw strength from our long history, we know that no matter how tough it is in the moment, we've always come back from a crisis stronger than before. And we draw strength from our beginnings, because Qantas was founded in 1920 in turbulent times, straight after the First World War and a devastating pandemic, the Spanish flu. So our centenary perhaps is a new beginning, the start of our next century. And while we have to make some painful decisions, we have to focus on that future. We know that flying will return, or people will be back in the skies. No aircraft will sit idle, and new ones will be arriving, including new ones for ultra-long-haul destinations. We're confident because we've been in tough spots before. In 2013, Qantas faced an uphill battle. The turnaround that followed set us up for years of growth and was only derailed by COVID-19. We know this new plan gets us back on track, back to growth, back to profit, and back to pushing boundaries like things like Project Sunrise. In closing, I want to recognise our people, their dedication to the national carrier, even during this time of great upheaval and uncertainty. They are a big part of what will carry us through this crisis. I also want to recognise our customers. Throughout all the recent turbulence, their support and loyalty has been truly amazing. From emails I've received through notes written on napkins sent to our crew to give them support through this period. Our commitment to you, our customers, is unchanged. Millions want to see people in places that they love, and they need an airline to take them there, particularly in the country the size of Australia. We will be smaller for a period of time, but we will still deliver an amazingly high level of care and service, and above all, safety. We continue to serve regional communities and support Australian tourism. And as the national carrier, we have a very important job to do, a proud history to uphold, and a bright future to look forward to. Thank you, and we may open it to questions.
Alan, we'll take some questions in the room first, and then we'll go to the phones.
Okay.
Thank you. You have a 3-year plan, but to get to that 3-year escape clause, basically, do you think this is it? Do you need to cut any further? Are you satisfied that what you're doing today will satisfy what you need to do for the next 3 years?
Well, Damien, we've put our best forecast of what we think will happen into the future, and we believe it's a realistic plan about domestic recovering, and we're very optimistic about domestic, that the domestic market will get back to maybe 70% of pre-COVID levels in the next year, and the following year to 100%. We think international will take a long time, only there'll be nothing this next financial year, and July next year we may start seeing some international services, and that will only get us to 50%. The following year, only 2/3 of the pre-COVID international schedule. So given that, we put this plan together. We believe that's a realistic plan, and these are the only job losses that are needed. The issue for us will not be further job losses, but how long people are stood down. Our best guess is that we have 8,000 people working today. We will stand up to 15,000 by the end of the calendar year if the borders open and domestic tourism is flying again. It will still take us to the middle of 2022 to stand up 21,000 people back in employment. Any variation, second waves, could delay those stand-ups, but don't diminish our need for those jobs. And we think those jobs are needed for the group into the future. And I think our plan is I think, very realistic, and I'm hoping there won't be any further stand-downs from the dates that we're explaining today.
The equity raising that you're doing is significant, but who knows how long this, I know you've done all the modelling, but who knows how long this might go on for. Would you be asking for any government assistance like Virgin has? I mean, I know in the past you said that that's not something you'd do, but it's a pretty dire situation.
So our prime objective is to look after our own shop and making sure we're fit to manage our way through this and grow when we come through. So even before the equity raising, we said with the hard work our teams have done, we had gotten our cash burn down to $40 million a week. That's still a lot of money, but compared to the rest of the airlines around the world, it's probably one of the lowest given our size. That gave us, with the debt we raised, because we had raised debt on aircraft we bought with cash over these very strong last 5 financial years. That gave us enough runway to get to the end of 21 with no borders opening and the current environment in place. With the equity raise today, this gets us well through 22 into 23. I don't think anybody's forecasting that this will continue. We have other bigger problems if this continues well into that period of time. So our view has to be look after our own shop, get our own shop in order and make sure we get that right. Where the government assistance, which has been invaluable, has come in, is in a number of areas, and they have given us significant assistance for our people. JobKeeper, we've received over $400 million in JobKeeper support or will. That goes directly to the people that are stood down. I think that's been a great program, and we've said to the government, given that our industry is going to take a longer time to recover, the tourism industry is going to take a longer time to recover, can we have some form of mechanism similar to that? It doesn't have to be exactly the same to help. And that's where we'd like the government support to the individuals. And I think the government has done a great job on that. The other support we've gotten, and we have gotten support to operate while there was really no travel, a minimal viable network. That meant we were kept the country in contact. We allow people to travel for medical reasons and other reasons. And of course, we couldn't lose any more money on doing that, given how sensitive our liquidity was. And the government supported that for a number of months, continues to support it, our regional communities. And I think that's a straight pass-through of our costs to them. But they're the support. I think the whole industry has been given. Virgin have been given it, Rex have been given it. And that's where we'd like the government to continue that support.
You've got 6,000 people. Do you know who they are? Have you decided who's going to go? Have they been told yet? How will that process work? And is it more international than domestic? Flight attendants, people we see, we get on a plane, crew, who are you looking at?
So we're looking at, and we obviously from today will start to consult with our unions, and also we'll be speaking to our employee work groups across the company. It will be a combination of cabin crew, engineering, ground services teams, and also corporate teams as well. So I think that it will be felt right across all work groups at Qantas. Because the international is stood down for longer than the domestic, the ongoing stand down will impact international workforces more significantly. So I think that the most important thing that we're going to be doing today is spending a lot of time talking with those groups. We've got frontline leaders that will be out there. We've been holding webinars since the beginning of the pandemic. We've had up to three webinars, company-wide webinars a week, and we're continuing to do that. So we recognise that uncertainty is going to be the thing that we want to bring to those work groups and those individuals, and certainty as quickly as we can.
And Damien, we have an obligation to inform the ASX of the significant changes we're making, and then we go into consultation with the unions, which will be happening from today. And the numbers, we give a breakdown of them. There's around 1,500 of non-operational roles, i.e. head office and management roles, that are part of this reduction. It's nearly a 30% reduction in our head office and management in the company. It's in ground ops, the people that load the aircraft, 1,500 people. In cabin crew, 1,000 people. In engineering, 630 jobs, and in pilots, 220 jobs associated with the removal of the 747s, essentially, which won't come back into service and won't be replaced. We haven't picked, or can't pick the individuals, because we have to go through a voluntary redundancy, and we don't know if people will want to be get voluntary redundancy. We think there'll be a lot of, in certain groups, there'll be a lot of interest in that, and then once we've exhausted that, we go to compulsory redundancies. So that's why the names are not picked, and that'll take us a few months to get through that. Yes, some thoughts. questions on the phones? First question. Technology may not be working, is it?
Pardon me, your first question comes from Patrick Hatch from the Sydney Morning Herald. Please go ahead.
Hey, Patrick.
G'day, Alan. Alan, back in May, you more or less ruled out needing an equity raising because you had aircraft you could borrow against and liquidity that could see you through to the end of next year. So could you just talk a bit about what's changed between then and now?
Yeah, I'll say a few words and then I get Vanessa. Obviously, things have evolved a lot, and one of the things that we've been working on since May is what the size and shape of Qantas looks like into the future. And when we looked at that, we figured that there was an opportunity to really accelerate that transformation, to get us in a better shape, to be able to order the aircraft for Project Sunrise, to expand again and allow the airline to have really strong, robust strength to get through whatever happens into the future. The restructuring of the business we announced today will cost up to $1 billion. We could have avoided or delayed doing that over a period of time, but we didn't think that was in the interest of the company or interest of our people, and giving them certainty was really key, and the acceleration and the fast implementation of that restructuring program this equity raise allows us to do, and allows to get the business back to the financial strength that it had before COVID-19.
Yeah, and just to add what Alan was saying, back in May, we and the announcement that we made, we were very much looking and making a statement on our liquidity position, where we had a 40 million average net burn that took us into the following year if conditions remained unchanged. But we're now in the recovery phase, and I think the one thing that we've seen as we've managed through COVID, it has been an incredibly dynamic environment. And as Alan said, that the equity raise today and the restructuring that we can now see in terms of how we need to right-size our business in that recovery phase and beyond is an important part of how we're going to accelerate through that recovery, how we're going to restore our financial flexibility, and also how we're going to position for profitability in the future. So I think it's a very important step for us at this time.
One thing, Patrick, that's continues to be important for us, we're one of 3 airlines in the world that have investment grade rating. That allows us to borrow money at a lot cheaper rate than a lot of airlines out there. Southwest and Ryanair are the only 2 airlines in that category. And making sure that we are disciplined in our financial framework, that we have a strong balance sheet that allows us to borrow money into the future at very low interest rates and have accessibility to that. And as I said, the third phase of what we want to try and achieve here is get back to growth. We've gotten Airbus to agree to continue the terms of the A350s to allow us to do Project Sunrise. It is my every intent that when we can get Qantas back into flying, when we can turn the business around, that we will be doing Project Sunrise, and we need that financial strength in order for us to be able to afford and purchase those aircraft and take that great business opportunity. And that's all part of setting us up really well for the future. Next question.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Jamie Freed from Reuters. Please go ahead.
Hey, Jamie.
Hi. Just with the stand down, is there also any possibility you'll try to negotiate with unions around their EBA so that people could share workarounds and maybe work less and get paid less but still work a bit? And then just also to clarify earlier, is it right that you said July next year is when you expect the first international flights?
Sorry, the second part of your question I missed, Jamie.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify some of your earlier comments. Did you say that July next year is when you see international restarting?
Yeah, so the first part, we're working through, every group is different, and there may be some opportunities for us to work on sharing hours that we need to negotiate with the unions. For example, as we start up international again, we're not going to be able to put all of the aircraft back in the air simultaneously. Our intent is to put the 787s back and the 330s back. They're the smaller aircraft. We're parking the A380s for at least 3 years. because they don't have any use, we think, during this period of time. And what we're talking to the union about is what's the mechanism that as you activate the fleet, that work could be shared. It means less hours for a lot of people, but it gets more people into flying again. So they're all parts of the dialogue about how we implement that, which I think is key. The reason why we've done it the way we have is that we're very clear the 6,000 jobs, and it was a hard decision. The 6,000 jobs are jobs that we don't see coming back for a long time, and it's only fair to the people that are involved in those areas that we offer them the redundancy, that we give them certainty so they can go out and get other jobs. And we will be spending around $600 million in redundancies. The redundancy arrangements in Qantas have been and always will be very attractive. And I think that's fair to those individuals. The stand down, we're trying our best to get JobKeeper and another form to help them. And we do need those people. There are jobs for them in the future. And we do want them to get back, and how we get them back to work is really a discussion with the unions. And on your, we are taking a view on international, given how successful. We're very optimistic about the Australian position, and as you know, our profitability has been in the past driven by domestic and our loyalty program, which is doing really well. But international, we have to be realistic about it, and saying with what's happening in the rest of the globe, it is probably an extended period of time before we'll open up those borders. We're keeping ourselves ready. We can always activate the 787s and the 330s if the market opens up earlier. But for the purpose of this plan, we are working on international operations not starting in any real size. We might get the Trans-Tasman before then. We may get other nations opening up with bubbles, but to real size from July of next year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Once again, if you wish to ask a question, please press *1 on your telephone. Angus Whitley from Bloomberg News. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi, Alan. Actually, you answered my first question on what changed your mind already, but could you talk a bit about what the smaller Qantas will look like internationally? Like, which routes do you anticipate running fewer frequencies or scaling back completely? What's your vision there?
So I think, and I think everybody knows that there's optimism at some stage we may be able to open a Trans-Tasman bubble. That operates mainly aircraft that are used for domestic 737s and A330s, but it is a massive market in volume. The New Zealanders are the second largest tourism group to come to Australia. Chinese were number one before COVID-19. And Australians are the largest tourism group to go to New Zealand. So this is really, really good for tourism in both countries. And we're hoping with the pent-up demand that we're seeing there for people to fly into destinations, that could generate some good volumes and potentially before July of next year, which we believe is potentially feasible. I should say the recent Jetstar sale that we did is a good indication of why we have confidence for domestic in New Zealand. Jetstar launched $19 airfares, 10,000 at that level, but a lot of attractive airfares are at another level. And they sold over 200,000 seats last week. Jetstar in a normal day would get maybe up to 10 bookings a minute. In a sale before COVID-19, 100 bookings in a minute. They got over 200 bookings a minute last week. There's huge demand out there once the borders open up and we can get people to travel in Australia. And that's why, we're very keen for the borders to be open. We know it has to be done in the right way, but we're very keen and we're continuing talking to the States about how that will happen. The rest of international, the view is to try and open up our international network. If there's a vaccine, it may happen rapidly. If there's other ways of testing or treatment, it may happen a little bit slower. But our view is that we start with the smaller aircraft, the newest aircraft, the most capable aircraft, and establish our network as fast as possible. So the 787s have 230 seats on it. They're half the size of the A380s. So we'll operate them with frequency to LA, to New York, to Chicago, to London, to the markets in Asia when they open, and we can establish a very extensive network really fast. And then, unfortunately, it means, because they are too big, the aircraft, and the economics are not as good as the 787s, the A380s have to remain on the ground for at least 3 years until we see those international volumes being brought back. And the A380s we announced today, we're writing down the value of them. The aircraft are being put into Mojave Desert because it's a better environment for the aircraft to be sitting there. The environment protects the aircraft a lot more, and we have the intention at the right time to reactivate them and come them back in, but that is a considerable amount of time away. So you'll see frequency and smaller aircraft and international, and the bigger aircraft occurring a lot later.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Lucas Beard from Australian Financial Review. Please go ahead.
Hey, Lucas.
Hey, Alan. I was just hoping that you might be able to elaborate on why you weren't able to wait for the results of Treasury's JobKeeper review before you would make such drastic changes to your workforce, or even wait until some JobKeeper-like thing for aviation comes through from the government later on, and how those conversations about the future of JobKeeper around aviation being with government, are you confident something will come through soon on that front?
Yeah, Lucas, I mean, the reality is our position is our position, and irrespective of what happens on JobKeeper or an alternative mechanism, we don't have work for those employees, and that's unfortunate. We don't have work now. We'll eventually have work.
Door knockers out there talking to the community, inviting them to come and get a free test, whether they be symptomatic or asymptomatic. That'll be done in lots of new ways. For instance, we have ambulances and other vans that will literally be at the end of people's streets. So they will be invited to come and get a test, and they'll only have to travel 50 or 100 metres in order to complete that test. I'll come back to saliva testing and some breakthroughs that have come from the Doherty, something that every Victorian should be very proud of in just a moment, because that will mark a new way of testing. Some of our tests will be done that way from next week. But in the first instance, those two worst affected suburbs, we have right now, and we'll have over the next 3 days, 50% of those suburbs tested. That is about 5,000 tests per suburb, as well as, of course, each and every door that we knock on, each and every resident that we speak to, we're able to reinforce very simple but very important messaging. If you're sick, get tested. If you're sick, you cannot go to work. You cannot pretend that you aren't sick. You can't simply continue on as you normally would. That is both dangerous and simply wrong. Now, I know there's been some discussion about local government areas, and that was the most appropriate way to define the community transmission challenge that we faced, but I'm now in a position to be able to confirm for you the 10 suburbs where we have a community transmission challenge. I've of course already named 2 of those, Keilor Downs and Broadmeadows. Maidstone, Auburn Vale, Sunshine West, Hallam, Brunswick West, Fawkner, Reservoir and Pakenham. They are the 10 suburbs that will be all 50% tested, and if we can do more, of course we will, over the next 10 days. The first 3 days are solely focused on Keilor Downs and Broadmeadows, but we will move to the balance of those suburbs over the course of a 10-day period. That is about 100,000 tests. It may finish up being more than that. I expect that if people are visited and they're asked to participate in an unprecedented suburban testing blitz, I would expect that most people's answer will be yes. And we will look to get as many tests as we possibly can from those communities. Just to explain, it's fairly logical, but just to make the point, if we can find all the positives in those suburbs, then they can be home quarantined, they can be given the support that they need, and we can, despite the fact that numbers would likely go up as a result of that very focused, very targeted testing, we'll then be in a position to be confident that we have in fact contained it, and again, we're back consistent with the suppression strategy that we are all pursuing. I just want to talk about some other very important boost, if you like, as we move into this next phase of our response to this virus. The contact tracing and outbreak team, given that we do anticipate we will find more positive cases, and of course that comes against the backdrop of seeing more community transmission in the community than we would like, has been increased in capacity by 350 people. That takes the outbreak and contact tracing team to about 1,350 people. They are all Victorian Government employees. Then the 1,000 people who will be out door knocking, and I think you've seen some of them in their uniforms out doing that important work in a culturally and, if you like, language appropriate way, making sure we can engage with everybody who needs to hear this message, and that is everyone. If you are sick, get tested. If you are sick, don't go out. That is 1,000 strong. Again, they are Victorian Government employees. We are expanding the number of test sites. I know there has been some time taken, queues and some other challenges there. Whilst I apologise for any inconvenience that may have caused people, I must say it is a good thing to see so many people coming forward and getting tested. And I will make the point that whilst we're going to have this targeted blitz in those worst affected suburbs, our overall statewide surveillance, the tests that we will do in non-hotspot communities, will remain very, very strong, because we have to keep that whole of state. We have to make sure we've always got that picture, that complete picture, right across the whole state. There will be, we're going to 135 testing centres, so that's a significant increase. There'll be 10 additional drive-through testing sites, and there will be some mass testing sites. For instance, at the Melbourne Showgrounds, where Keilor College, all students, all parents, all teachers and staff will be tested there, because we know that that's a really convenient way for us to get to a big number within that local community, and to be certain that we're finding any positive cases that might be there. That is probably the best point for me to then shift to talking about the ADF support, because they will be critical in standing up that Showgrounds testing site and conducting many, many tests. I've asked the Prime Minister, and I'm very grateful that he's agreed to provide ADF support in a number of areas. Firstly, medical teams to support with those really big testing sites. Some other transportation support, particularly getting people from the airport to hotel quarantine, and also some of the sort of administrative and logistical support that we see each and every fire season, and we certainly saw it last fire season. Teams of people who will work in DHHS and at EMV at the State Control Centre, just to coordinate what is a massive logistical task. We're very grateful that that request for support has been granted. There is one other area that the ADF will work very hard to support us, and that is in terms of doing more testing. We needed to grow our overall testing capacity. Our laboratories can do about 18,000 tests per day. As you can see, we did more than 20,000 just yesterday. We'll be doing more than 20,000 when you count overall Victorian testing and the really targeted Keilor Downs, Broadmeadows and other suburban testing. That blitz will mean we need more testing capacity. I have reached out to the Premiers of New South Wales, Tasmania, South Australia and Queensland, and I'm very pleased to say that they have agreed, and I'm very grateful that they have agreed to give us some of the lab capacity that they have. The ADF will be in charge of transporting those samples to capital cities for them in turn to go to laboratories and for those tests to be processed. So that's another really key part of the ADF support that we've asked for and that we've received, and I thank the Prime Minister very much for agreeing to do that. In terms of other new announcements, I think that probably covers most of it. I just want to talk about saliva testing just for a moment. The Doherty, as you know, we've provided them with some funding to do all sorts of work on this virus. They were the first research institute outside China to be able to, in fact a world first, to be able to break this virus down and to give us the most complete picture in really raw, basic science. They've done a fantastic job. They are really one of the very best medical research institutes anywhere in the world, particularly when it comes to infectious diseases. They've developed this important saliva test where a sample is placed in a cup. You need much less PPE. You can administer the test yourself. It's a more pleasant experience than the current test. It won't completely replace the current test. It won't change the amount of time that the laboratory takes to analyse the test, but it will certainly reduce the time taken to take that sample to actually conduct the test. So that's something that all Victorians should be proud of. That's not been rolled out anywhere else in the country, so it'll be done here first. And I think we're aiming to have those tests, at least a portion of our overall testing, will be done via those means from Monday next week. So basically, this is a massive boost to testing capacity. It is unprecedented. This suburban testing blitz is all about finding all of those people that have this virus, then having them quarantined in their home with appropriate support. It's about bringing further stability to these numbers. The numbers will grow, but that's exactly the strategy. Find these cases. The real trick in this virus is what you don't know until, of course, it's too late. Rather than waiting for an unsustainable number of community transmissions to become known, we are going to go out and literally, door to door, we are bringing the public health and coronavirus response to your doorstep if you are in these worst affected suburbs. And I anticipate that people will be very cooperative, people will work with us, but I would ask if someone knocks on your door and invites you to take a free test, particularly if it only involves going down the end of your street, or in fact you may, once the saliva testing is up and running, be able to do it on your doorstep, that is a powerful contribution to all of us beating this thing and delivering the strategy that was agreed to at National Cabinet level. That is to suppress this virus, to contain it, but inevitably to live with outbreaks and some cases for many, many months to come. I just can't stress this enough. We will see these numbers go up in coming days. That will be a measure of the work that we're doing, a measure of the success of this strategy. Now, we might all be very pleasantly surprised, test literally entire suburbs and not get many positive cases. That would be a great problem to have. But I am indicating to you, I think that we will see more cases, and that's exactly why we're doing this testing, to get to the bottom of how much virus is out there, to take direct action with those families, with those people that have tested positive, to keep them in their homes, and to make sure that they're not spreading the virus to anybody else. Again, to other states, to the Commonwealth, through the very targeted ADF support with very specific roles that they'll be playing. That's using their skills, the best use of their skills that I can think of, and I'm very, very grateful to everybody. We are all in this together. This is no less serious than a bushfire. I'm not too fussed what uniform people wear, and we're all working hard together to get this done. And just like we send firefighters and air bombers to different states, and we get the benefit of their support as well when we need it, this is like a public health bushfire. We need to work together. We are, and I hope Victorians take some comfort from knowing that this is not about what side you're on. We're all on the same side, and that is to deliver the strategy, to find the positive cases, to suppress this virus, and to make sure that we can get to the other side of it. Whilst I've gone through all the features of this next phase in our response, I probably can't do justice to the amount of hours, the hundreds and hundreds of hours of planning that have gone on in the last week or so across so many agencies. I'm deeply grateful to all of them. This is the appropriate response. This will see us contain the virus. This will see us deal with a challenge that was in many respects part of the strategy. We have not determined to keep a lockdown in place, a hard lockdown for a year. We are opening up gradually, cautiously, and we have seen more cases. We will continue to see more cases. The key question is staying on top of them and making sure that we can contain the virus. I'm very confident that that's what we'll be able to do. Now, it's probably best if Brett now speaks and takes you through some of the public health thinking, the kind of the epidemiological rationale behind these suburbs, these case numbers and the trends. And then perhaps Jenny can just take us through a little bit of detail around that big boost in testing and the additional sites to try and deal with some of the delays that we have faced. If I can, again, just perhaps for the benefit of people in those suburbs, so we've gone from whole local government areas down to a much more targeted approach based on data. Let me again read Keilor Downs, Maidstone, Auburn Vale, Sunshine West, Hallam, Broadmeadows, Brunswick West, Fawkner, Reservoir, Pakenham. People are going to be knocking on your door and they're going to be asking you to get tested. Please say yes. Please go and get tested. That is the most important thing that you in those suburbs can do to help us contain this virus. If you're sick, get tested. If you're sick, do not go to work. Do not leave your house other than to get tested. And you live in a household, so it's not just if you're sick, it's if any member of your family is sick. Again, this thing travels so fast, it is wildly infectious. This is the right response at the right time. And to tell you a bit more about the science that sits behind it, I'll now hand over to the Chief Health Officer.
Thank you, Premier. Indeed, these suburbs represent the most recent active transmission, the most recent new cases, and we really are focused on what we call the community cases, the cases where we don't know where they've acquired the virus. They are an indication that there's transmission in the community that we need to identify and track down. Outbreaks are occurring, but the numbers associated with outbreaks, they all start with one individual. And so in a sense, we need to set aside the size of the outbreak and understand that transmission is really a reflection of those community cases, because those are the cases that we need to identify in order to get on top of the transmission that occurs. When there's an outbreak occurring, we know who their close contacts are, we know where they've got it from, those close contacts go into quarantine and those outbreaks get snuffed out. With community transmission, it's an indication that there's virus circulating in the community. And so the focus in these areas is indeed to get on top of that transmission wherever it's occurring. And because we don't know exactly who may have the virus, the step up in testing is a really critical component. We are throwing everything at this and the public health response is entirely appropriate to ramp up testing and ramp up the messaging and engagement that says, if you're unwell, please stay home, please get tested, stay home until you get that result, and do not mix with others until you're cleared of the virus. It's also true that regardless of whether you're getting tested, regardless of where you are in Victoria, you need to try and minimise the interactions that you have with people you don't normally see, people you don't normally live with. So if you don't have to see people, please don't. If you don't have to go to gatherings, please don't. If you can shop online, do that. If you can do retail purchasing online, please do that. We know that there are some busy retail settings at the moment. The door-to-door approach is really a way to try and minimise any barriers that people might have for testing. We know that some people have logistic difficulties. They may not own a car. They may not have the time and space to go forward for testing. So bringing testing to your home is part of the solution. I also do want to say, though, that if you're outside of these 10 suburbs, that is not a reason to be complacent or to think that if you've got mild illness or any illness that you don't need to think about testing, you don't need to think about isolating yourself, because you absolutely do. But there's been less transmission identified in other areas, but we'll see more transmission unless we can test anyone who's unwell across Melbourne in particular, but across Victoria. Happy to take questions.
I might go to Jenny first.
Sure, thanks.
Good morning. It's important that Victorians understand that you are not immune from catching coronavirus because of the postcode that you live in. Whilst we've identified 10 hotspot suburbs where we have concerns about new cases and community transmission, since this pandemic started, we have seen people diagnosed with coronavirus from Portsea and Toorak across to Broadmeadows, across the breadth of our state. So it's important that the whole community, our whole state, continues to take this pandemic seriously, to stay home if you have any symptoms whatsoever, not to go to school, not to go to work, and to get tested at the earliest opportunity. So we will be maintaining our testing capacity across the breadth of our state, and this is why we have a particular focus on ensuring that we can increase our pathology processing capacity so that everyone in Victoria is able to retain that capacity to be tested. But as the Premier explained, we are engaging in a massive logistics exercise over the next 10 days, focusing on those 10 key suburbs. And so we will have additional testing sites open in those communities. So from today, we are opening the Melbourne Showgrounds to anyone who has relevant symptoms to be tested. For those communities who are in these identified locations, of course, they will be able to be tested regardless of whether they have symptoms. And staff and students and families from Keilor Downs Secondary College were invited from yesterday to present at the showgrounds, and that will continue for a matter of days. I understand that about 100 staff members already presented yesterday at that site. Casey Fields in Cranbourne is open from today, and Broadmeadows Shopping Centre. So we will be announcing further locations in Moreland, in Melton, in Pakenham, working with health services and making sure that communities in those 10 suburbs we've identified today have access to testing. So this massive logistics exercise is going to involve an army of door knockers, door knocking on people's homes in those 10 suburbs, explaining to them that they have they're there because there have been a number of confirmed cases in that local community, explaining the symptoms related to coronavirus and encouraging people to be tested and helping to facilitate that testing to occur. So 1,000 people, an army strong, knocking on people's doors, starting in Keilor Downs and Broadmeadows today and extending right across those 10 communities over the next 10 days, aiming to do at least 10,000 tests per day just in those communities, and of course with the rest of Victoria exceeding probably our 20,000 record that we've hit in the last couple of days, having the capacity now to test or analyse. We can certainly test more people, but analyse about 25,000 tests per day. And I want to express my gratitude to my interstate colleagues. I've had a number of conversations in recent days with my counterparts and express my appreciation to New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia and Tasmania for their assistance in offering us, I guess, the capacity to test or process about another 5,000 test results per day by sending those swab samples to interstate labs as well. So the way the testing, the door knockers will work is they'll be explaining the need for people to be tested, seeking people's participation, and either then getting 800 people who will be healthcare workers, testing people on their doorstep if that's necessary, or sending them down to the end of the street, or encouraging them to present at one of our testing locations in their community. So the vans will be out from today in the Keilor Downs and Broadmeadows community. The door knockers will be clearly identifiable. They're wearing very distinct jackets, so people will be reassured that it is a member of our team knocking on their door and providing them with very reliable information. So I want to thank, as the Premier has, all the agencies that have been involved across government in facilitating what is going to be the biggest testing program that we've certainly had in our state and certainly in the nation. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Doherty Institute. The Premier and I were at the Doherty back in March, where we announced a $6 million grant for them to develop innovative tests for the coronavirus. They really are a world leader in medical research, in particular in relation to research relating to this new virus. And they have developed this saliva test, which will be an Australian first, and we'll start to roll that out from Sunday and into Monday. This is going to be particularly helpful for us to be able to test more children, to test people with disabilities, people in nursing homes, people with dementia. It is very challenging to test people in those cohorts with a swab test. So that's going to make it more comfortable and much quicker for us to do mass testing. So we'll be focusing on those particular groups, but we will be slowly rolling this out to enable more people to access the saliva test in coming weeks. But we will continue, of course, to use the swab test through our testing locations as well. So finally, I just want to thank Victorians for their patience in recent days. We've had to flick the switch very, very quickly from when the Premier and I were here on Saturday announcing our concerns about the increasing numbers of cases in Victoria, putting a pause, a break, I guess, on the easing of restrictions and having to reactivate a number of testing sites very, very quickly. The turnaround time at the present time with testing results still remains about a 2-day turnaround. It is really important for anyone being tested to understand that, you should never get tested and then go into the shops. If you're at one of our pop-up sites, you should stay at home and isolate until you receive your testing result. And we'll endeavour to get that result to you as quickly as possible, understanding, of course, that the sheer volume of tests that we will be processing now is going to increase quite significantly. We'll be sharing more information about further testing locations over the next few days, particularly focus in those 10 locations. We do expect to have a site open very soon in Pakenham, in Melton and in Moreland, and we'll be sharing the details of those addresses with the community through the normal channels, both on the department's website. As Professor Sutton spoke about yesterday, we do want to encourage people to shop around. There are many GPs offering testing for coronavirus as well as many of our public health services. There are many opportunities other than our drive-through settings for people to get tested for coronavirus. So finally, this pandemic is not over. It's very important that if you are exhibiting any of the symptoms, particularly as we're going into these cold winter months, that you do take this seriously, that you stay home and you get tested at the earliest opportunity. Thank you.
I'm going to take any questions you have. Well, the document talks about things that may be necessary in the future, but again, we're not at a point where we can make detailed announcements about that. That's consistent with the approach, Rich, that we've taken all the way through. If we're contemplating it, if we're planning for it, if it's something that's a live option, then I feel obliged to let people know that. But based on, well, I think that we have a local problem at the moment, and that's why we're doing the biggest suburban testing blitz at a very local level, literally bringing the public health response to people's doorsteps. That's not happened before. So it is a local problem in its own nature, but unless we get on top of it, logic tells you and science tells you that it won't be local for long. It'll finish up something that's much broader. But this is the appropriate response, but it's also appropriate to indicate to people just how serious this is. If people do not participate in this program, or if people have this kind of general view that, oh, well, it's over because I want it to be, then we will finish up with not just stalling or putting off some of our planned easing. We will finish up with a second wave, and we will finish up back where we started. Well, I think you've got, if I give you an example, we've got 18,590 people that have been in hotel quarantine, a total hotel quarantine in Victoria. There is a larger number in New South Wales, and that's just a function of the number of flights that have returned. There are different types of flights as well. So, for instance, we had a flight from Montevideo, if my memory serves me correctly, and there were about 100 people on that flight, and just about everybody on the flight had it. We've had some of those really big challenges. So's New South Wales, but the load has been sort of spread, if you like. But I do think they've had more of those emergency repatriation flights than we've had, and they've had a slightly different cohort to deal with. We think it's fantastic that we've got ADF support, particularly whether it's flying samples to other capital cities for their laboratories to help us out, ADF support to get people from the airport to the hotel where they'll be quarantined for 14 days, or indeed ADF support at the Melbourne Showgrounds, for instance, where there will be many, many thousands of tests done. Look, if there's more that is needed, I'm very grateful and very pleased to be able to say to you that the Prime Minister has offered any and all support, just like all of our agencies across the board are doing everything they possibly can in order to support. It's not my phone, just for the purposes of the record. It's the fantastic health reporter Grant MacArthur from the Herald Sun ringing somebody else from the Herald Sun, I expect. We'll get back to him later. there is support offered across the board, and that's really important. This is a public health bushfire, and when it comes to bushfires, we always work together, and when it comes to coronavirus, we're doing exactly the same thing, and I'd hope that all Victorians took comfort in that. No, I think we've got this right. We have there have been some ADF support in the State Control Centre, smaller numbers, but there's been some support there. Ultimately, you put the best resources where they will be best used and where they are needed most. And now, because of community transmission and an abundance of caution, an approach that says let's hit this really hard and try and contain it, now's the time to have additional support. For instance, if you're not having to use laboratories in other states, there's no need to have ADF personnel flying samples to other states. We do need that now, and I think that that is the safest way, the best way, with all the infection control protocols and then double them again. I think that's one of the really important roles that the ADF can play.
On Tuesday you said that it wasn't necessary to call in the ADF. What changed your mind in that 24 hours?
Well, I think, Laurel, just to be clear, on Tuesday I was in no position to be making announcements. We were still putting together a plan. It was not the time to be making those announcements. Now it is, because we've done that detailed work on many hours of work, and I'm very grateful that not just the ADF but other agencies and indeed other states are happy to help in the context of, a problem in one state is a problem in every state, because this is so wildly infectious. All of us have to get on top of this as best we can, and that's why everybody's pitching in and everybody's doing exactly what they can. When I spoke with the Premier of Tasmania, I knew that he wouldn't necessarily be able to do thousands of tests, but the speed with which he agreed to be able to do 350 tests a day for us, it's a fantastic thing. We are all in this together, and we've all got to work together to deal with something that doesn't respect state borders, has never respected state borders. We will finish up with a problem across the nation if we don't get on top of this, and I'm really confident we have the plan to do that. Sorry? I missed the first bit, Noel. No, I spoke to the Prime Minister a couple of evenings ago, and I said I have 3 specific requests. I've got other premiers agreed to do testing, but I need to get the samples to them, and I want to do that in the safest way possible. So I want your help to do that. Answer, yes. I know you've got some specialist medical teams that can do the kind of field hospital thing. This won't be a hospital, it'll be a testing facility, really big, the Melbourne Showgrounds being the best example. I need some help if you've got some people to help me run those. Answer, yes. I then need, if you've got those people who are absolute experts, and we've used them before in the bushfires, the people who are logistics experts, just to help us plan something that's bigger than has ever been done anywhere, can I have some of those too? And the answer was yes, and I'm very, very pleased about that.
Professor Sutton, would you have a detail the testing you've seen in the last couple of days? Is that from these hotspots, or is it just Melbourne? Seeing cases that are outside of these hotspot areas, but they are still concentrated in those hotspot areas, and that's not surprising. The outbreaks have occurred where community transmission is occurring, and so a lot of these most recent test results relate to that as well. But the actual people putting their hand up for testing, are they from? Is the message getting through to people from these 10 areas? Absolutely. Tested, or is it people from it is all over. We've seen an increase in testing across Metro Melbourne, across Victoria, but certainly the hotspot areas are stepping up in particular for testing, and that's a fantastic thing. We don't want anyone to be shy about it. We want it to be as easy as possible. Have you worked out how it's jumped out of the hotels into the community? No, not exactly. Clearly, they're a higher risk environment when you've got so many currently infectious individuals, usually 30 at any one time. So there are always opportunities, and it's a complex operation to manage PPE and infection prevention and control. That's all been reviewed, as I've said. We may never know exactly what's happened in terms of it getting out, but we're confident that we've turned over every stone to try and strengthen the processes to make sure it doesn't happen again.
No other state minister has just described our hotel quarantine system. The federal health minister has described our system as deficient as compared to other states. Do you think that is the failing that has resulted
Look, I think when it's a huge logistic operation, as the Premier said, 18,500 people coming through, there will always be opportunities for things to go awry, and there will always be an intent to look at that and to remedy it. And I think that's exactly the process we're going through. I'm confident that we've strengthened it to a point where I don't think we'll see it again. But we have to be alert to the possibility, because a virus as infectious as this on surfaces or through the air will always be a potential transmission risk to anyone who's in close contact.
Can I just add to Brett's answer? Other ministers are free to run the commentary that they choose to run. But let's be really clear here. We've had people with no connection to hotel quarantine who have tested positive and then have gone home and pretended that they never took the test, let alone got a positive result. They've gone about their business as if they didn't have the virus when they've actually had a test and have proven and have tested positive. So there will always be, in anything that involves this many human beings, there will always be some variance. There will always be good decisions that are made and sometimes bad ones. And they're often at a very personal level. That's the challenge that we are dealing with here. And that's why we've got to make sure that we've got any and all resources on this. We've got really clear messaging and that we are very much focused on providing the best response in all of its different forms. Everything from communication, door knocking, getting information out to people, testing in a very targeted and unprecedented way. So many tests at such a localised level, but also further to Rich's point before, we will have some variance in terms of rates per 100,000 in different parts of the state, but I'm not prepared just to get to the state average in Broady or in Keilor Downs or any of these 10 hotspots. I want to test 50%, and we will test 50% over the coming days.
Do you intend to release the individual results from each suburb of people who live in and
I think that I want to get the Chief Health Officer's advice on how we reported that. Again, we don't want to do anything that might discourage people from coming forward and getting tested. That's why we've very carefully designed this, and it'll be done in the most... That's News Limited again. It'll be done in the most careful, considered way. We'll be clear about what we find in the broader sense, but as for that kind of localised reporting that can from time to time actually identify people, we just need to be careful with that.
when will we see active boots on the ground at hotels and showgrounds?
I think you'll see them at Melbourne showgrounds very soon. You'll see them certainly running transportation services from the airport to quarantine hotels. You'll see tests being flown to other capital cities fairly soon. I'm happy to come back to you with a bit of detail, but they've got some very specific and very, very important roles to play. I'm deeply grateful that they're going to be here doing that. That just means we can all do more because we have more people. At the same time, though, we've got 1,000 door knockers out there, 800 more people doing testing, 135 test sites. That's a big increase from what we have been running, and we've been running a very big testing program, arguably the nation's biggest. And then, of course, there's extra drive-through sites and a 350-person increase in an already massive outbreak and contact tracing team. That's the appropriate thing to do. You've got to hit this hard to contain it so that it doesn't get away from us.
And will that be the ADF's only role in the hotel quarantine, is just transporting people?
At this stage, yes, but again, there's a list of 3 things I've asked for. There might be a 4th and a 5th in very, very different areas. Again, they are going to be here, and I'm very pleased about that, just as they were in the bushfires. At the same time, though, they do have very specific skills, and if we can make best use of those, no matter the setting, no matter the context, then we will definitely do that. Yes. Everybody across Victoria cannot go on holidays if they are sick or if someone in their household is sick. You just can't do it. If everyone who is ill, even with the mildest of symptoms, does not travel and therefore put other people at risk, then the question doesn't. Then the question's basically answered. Yeah. No, there is an advisory, and it's been right throughout the whole global pandemic. If you're sick, the only thing you should be doing is getting tested, and then following that, you should be staying at home till you get your results. And if you're positive, you should be staying home for 14 days. And anyone who's a close contact of you should be doing the same thing. Ultimately, that advice has not changed, and it will not change. The really important point here is that message, Rich, will be being delivered on doorsteps across these suburbs. That's happening right now, and it will continue for the next 10 days. Well, the AHPPC at a national level has had something to say, and I think Brett's dealt with that. I suppose I'd flip your question and talk about the other end of the holiday process. We are going to have literally thousands and thousands of temperature guns. We're going to have people out in big numbers. That team of door knockers and others will be expanded even further to be out in big popular tourism spots, making sure that people are keeping their distance, making sure that people have got hand sanitizer, have got all of those positive messages, those critically important messages being reinforced again and again. And you will see, I think it's probably fair to, I think it is fair to say, you'll see more temperature checking going on across the state these school holidays than has ever been the case. And we think that's the appropriate thing to do.
Where would that be seen that?
Be it a whole range of, well, for instance, there are already processes in place for the snowfields, and those processes will be expanded to a whole range of other significant tourism spots. I think we all know where people spend their time. I'm not going to go through a list now, but I can get you some advice. We're going to have those sorts of approaches, public messaging, people moving around large areas where large numbers of people gather, and a whole range of temperature checking, particularly at a whole range of those sites that will have large numbers of people staying.
In light of the spike in cases,
Yes.
guidelines around face masks or masks in public, will that change at all?
That advice hasn't changed. There is a World Health Organisation have issued some statements in relation to the wearing of masks. Those statements have been read to include everybody. I think it's probably best to go back and have a look at the actual wording, and it talks about some places in other parts of the world that are currently dealing with, many thousands of cases every day and many thousands of deaths. That's where the World Health Organisation, and I think public health experts more broadly, think that the widespread use of masks is most effective.
Are you aware of a possible outbreak at the Coles Distribution Centre?
I might let the Chief Health Officer speak to outbreaks.
Yes, I am. There are two cases at the Coles Distribution Centre in Laverton that are associated with the Keilor Downs family outbreak. The response to that is underway. Coles, I'm sure, will deliver a statement on exactly how they're responding, but there'll be a number of people who will require quarantine by virtue of that. We hope that their operations are not affected significantly, but obviously there are close contacts in that setting. It's a pretty large area, and so there hasn't been a lot of close engagement between the staff there, but we have to take a precautionary approach because it's a big workforce. They move around a lot in that area, and so we have to continue to look into the close contacts and make sure that anyone who's symptomatic isn't turning up. They've already had significant processes in place where they're doing temperature checking and symptom checking and excluding people who are unwell, but that'll need to be redoubled. I can take you through some current outbreaks. So North Melbourne family outbreak that was previously H&M Northland, but it's linked to a family in North Melbourne. There are 2 family members of known cases who are additional, and the total outbreak is of 10. Brimbank family outbreak, 2 new cases linked there to take it to 5. Keilor Downs family, 2 new cases, taking that to 19. Wallet outbreak, previously St Monica's College Epping, linked to a social gathering in Wallet, taking it to 5, and Stanford Plaza with 1 new case, taking it to 16. Sorry? Oh, I don't have the details. We wouldn't give, the specific reason why people came together for a social gathering. Any social gathering that brings people in close contact is a risk of transmission.
How many people in the current cases are linked to staff and contractors at Coles?
I don't have the total for today. Linked to the Stanford Plaza.
To either Stanford or what is
Oh, I don't have that. I can provide it.
You said before that you had, that procedures had been improved and you were confident we'd have no more cases linked to hotel quarantine. Can you run us through some of the, I guess a lot of people are asking questions because we've never seen inside, no one knows how it works. Run us through what needed to be improved, what has been improved, and what the differences between Victoria's system, say, and other states where no other states have cases.
Well, I don't know how other states are running their quarantine, but in all cases, there are individuals who need to go into rooms, into individual units. Sometimes there's a family quarantining because there are small children, or sometimes there's a couple, but often on their own. And they need to stay in that room for 14 days. They are given a PCR test, a swab, early on in that quarantine period. If they become positive, even if they haven't got symptoms, then we know that they're a case and that they need to complete their time until they're cleared as a case. They also get another PCR test towards the end of their quarantine period. That's just in case they've got very mild symptoms, again, to identify anyone who might have been in quarantine as a well individual who might be coming a case towards the end of their 14-day period. They then need to extend their time in isolation because they're a case until they're cleared. They do get time to go out and get fresh air. That's really important for their psychological health. 14 days is a very long time to be in a unit without a break. So they are escorted out. When they're escorted out, they're wearing personal protective equipment. Everyone is maintaining appropriate distance. The people who are escorting them need to maintain hand hygiene, need to maintain that physical distance, and all of the rooms are cleaned between individuals, between families who complete their quarantine in a way that's in keeping with best practice.
So what changed though, Professor Sutton? What procedures had to be improved?
Well, every single thing has been gone through. Sometimes it was clear that there wasn't as robust an understanding of the distancing that was required between contracted staff. Sometimes it was a case of not having embedded all of the infection prevention and control procedures for hand hygiene, for example. So they had gone through training. Everyone struggles with embedding some of the really complex procedures that are involved in infection prevention and control. That's all been reviewed. As I said, I'm confident that it's been improved really significantly over the last couple of weeks.
There are further Black Lives Matters protests being planned for Brisbane and Sydney. Are you aware of similar being planned here?
No, I'm not. It would be a concern. We've always said that a gathering, really, any gathering that's of significant size shouldn't go ahead. The directions limit that now to 10 people outside. So I'd be concerned at any gathering above that size. Yeah. No. So quarantine is a 14-day compulsory period because once you've been exposed, you can develop illness at any time up to that 14-day mark. So getting a test early on in your quarantine period that's negative doesn't mean that you're not in the process of developing disease. Getting a test towards the end that's negative doesn't mean that you won't develop illness. You have to do your 14 days. For Connor, as for any other individual who's a confirmed case, they need to go through a period of at least 10 days to be cleared from isolation as a case.
Is another lockdown inevitable?
I hope not. I don't think so. Nothing's inevitable if we use all of the tools that we know work in this space, and all of the things that are being done in this really significant stepped up response are the appropriate things to do. What we haven't got quite as much control of are all of the things that human behaviour determines. So isolating yourself, minimising your interactions with other people, ensuring that you get tested and ensuring that you stay isolated until you get cleared from testing. Those are things that are not so much in our control, but we are doing absolutely everything to engage with people on understanding that. And if those basic elements can be done, this can absolutely be turned around, as it has in China, as it has with spikes in Singapore, as it has with increases in other settings like South Korea. We'll go through swings and roundabouts. It'll be an ongoing challenge as long as we've got cases anywhere in Victoria. But those basic approaches to respond will make a difference.
Is this the second wave?
Whether you call it a second wave or a spike in cases, it doesn't really matter. It is a danger, an ongoing danger, as long as there are chains of transmission in Victoria. So this is an uptick, there's no question. We need to make sure that we're doing all of the things that we normally do to manage that transmission.
Sure.
What do you make of the push to heritage in Victoria Housing?
I wouldn't make any comment on that. I haven't seen the details of the proposal. That's a matter for Heritage Victoria in the first instance. With the greatest of respect, the heritage listing of anything is not my priority at the moment. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I just want to say on behalf of all Victorians, and certainly on behalf of the government I'm proud to lead, we are very grateful for the fantastic work that Graham Ashton has done, for the contribution that he has made, and the contribution that his family has made. Being Chief Commissioner is not an easy task, and he has acquitted himself very, very well. He's done a fantastic job. I'm deeply grateful to him for the leadership he's offered in many very challenging times, and I wish him and his family well for the future. And he won't mind me saying this. In fact, I think he would agree wholeheartedly. I can't think of a better person to take over from Graham as Chief Commissioner than Shane Patton. That's a very exciting time. There is reform. There's things that have to be done, and I think that we're going to have the senior executive command team at Victoria Police to continue that important work. And if that's all, thank you very much. Whoever phone that is. No, I touched the phone, so it should be sanitised before you, and vice versa. I'm serious. Thanks very much.